Cuba. Beyond the culture, the cigars, and the classic cars, lies a world often overlooked, with jumping crocodiles, marching crabs, and tiny hummingbirds. Cuba, wild island of the Caribbean. Next time on Nature.
The wolf ran ahead and disappeared into the forest. Little Red Riding Hood was so busy.
In news from the woods, there were confirmed reports. The wolf sprinted directly to Grandmother's house.
A solid oak entry door with steel hardware and a deadbolt lock could have kept the wolf out of her house.
But the wolf got in, and there he found Grandma resting on an antique wrought iron bed worth between $6,000 and $8,000.
Did somebody say wolf? Wolfgang Amadeus?
In my interview with the wolf, he said he prefers to do his own stunts to convey more realism to the story.
Hey, if my dog Pal were there, the wolf wouldn't have gotten near Grandma's house. I am the wolf with big white teeth. Hello, little girl. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
There's more than one side to a story, and you deserve to hear them all.
Auschwitz, inside the Nazi state, is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Peter and Helen Bing, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Wasserman Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
I'm Linda Ellerby. Welcome back. We're going to be talking about the experience of Jewish children who were caught in the Nazi system. Joining me in this discussion are Deborah Dwork and John Roth. Deborah Dwork is professor of Holocaust Studies at Clark University. John Roth is professor of philosophy at Claremont McKenna College in California. Hide and seek is one of the most popular kids' games ever, everywhere. What's it like for a kid when it's not a game?
Hiding from the Nazis was no game. So, for example, a woman named Sarah Spier in the Netherlands was in over 30 different hiding homes, having to sit quietly, having to go into a cupboard when a neighbor would come to visit, to live as if she didn't exist at all, to use the toilet only when somebody else did, so that the chain was flushed only once, to not be able to change clothes or wash them because there couldn't be more washing on the line than there were people in the house. In all of these ways, to live as if you didn't exist at all was a terrible burden for the child who was in hiding and for the family that was hiding that child.
John, we know that thousands of individuals risked their lives to help Jews. I would like to say it's simply because there is that in humankind that says that is the right thing to do. Is that the only reason?
Percentage-wise, we're talking about a very, very small percentage of people in Nazi-occupied Europe who did this kind of work. Probably less than 1% of the population in those occupied territories pursued this kind of effort to rescue and save Jewish lives. Why did they do it? In the social scientific data that's been done on this, we find that some of these people who rescued were themselves kind of outsiders. They weren't people who always kind of marched to the conventional drummer. They had a little different attitude about, you know, what was good and right to do.
I think John is absolutely right that motivation was across the spectrum. There were people who did it because they were convinced Christians of any denomination, of all denominations. And there were secular people who did it simply and solely because they felt that it was the right thing to do.
How did the churches respond to the deportation and murder of children?
My own study of this would say that the churches as institutions, didn't respond to the plight of the children in any particular way during the Holocaust.
Do you not find that shocking?
I find it shocking and shameful, and I speak as a Christian here myself, that the churches acted as they did as institutions.
Suffer the little children to come unto me.
Yes, of course. It's one of the great teachings of Jesus in the Christian New Testament, that that one is to care especially for the child. And Jesus teaches that the little ones are of special value. But part of the abandonment of the Jews during the Holocaust period that implicates the churches in this tragic and lethal history was its abandonment of Jewish children.
How can society teach children today the values that motivated those people in World War II who stuck their necks out to rescue a child?
Most of the time when we think about the teaching or learning of ethics or morality, examples are very, very important.
And that the actions of one could make a difference.
The actions of one could make a difference in saving somebody else. And that the actions didn't have to always be huge, monumental actions. Small deeds carried out persistently could make a difference.
Deborah, what final thoughts would you have concerning how the rest of us shall be judged by how we treat the children of this world?
Just as we look at the infant mortality rate as an index of the health of a society, so it is that we look at the welfare of children as an index, as the prime index of the health of a society.
Genocide would disappear if we put children first. That we would not be killers, we would not do harm to one another if we truly put children first. And this may be one of the key lessons that comes out of our reflection on what happened to children in the Holocaust. The Germans, the Nazis, in a way, put children first in the sense of saying we have to get rid of them. But the opposite of that, if we had put children first, if we had cared for children, I think it's always true, if we care for children first, then many, many of the social ills, political problems, issues of discrimination that we face would be mitigated, if not eliminated.
I want to thank you both very much for joining us. I'm Linda Ellerby.
Explore the inner workings of Auschwitz-Birkenau through interactive maps, Nazi documents, and personal accounts. Visit Auschwitz on pbs.org. Stay tuned for more Auschwitz inside the Nazi state.
This PBS show will return in a moment.
The epic of the Castro era is probably one of the greatest stories of the last 100 years.
If you were to be politically effective, at some point you needed to be ready to wield a gun.
He's viewed as a savior, the James Dean of international politics.
This is a man who doesn't have a sense of feeling.
There's a limit to what the United States and self-respect can endure.
Fidel was basically telling Khrushchev that if Cuba might be sacrificed, that's okay.
Khrushchev's reaction to this was, it sounds like he's telling me to blow up the world.
He has defied the United States and survived.
Next time on POV, what does it take to get elected president?
A new hat, rather a bonnet, was tossed into the Democratic presidential race today.
In 1972, Shirley Chisholm found out.
If you can't support me, or you can't endorse me, get out of my way. You do your thing, and let me do mine.
Where the personal meets the political. It's Chisholm 72, only on POV.
They were mothers,
fathers, soldiers, statesmen. They were writers, rebels, leaders, crusaders. They were American heroes. They were American slaves. This is their story. Slavery and the Making of America.
We now continue with Auschwitz, inside the Nazi state. The Nazi state is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Peter and Helen Bing, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Wasserman Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Linda Ellerby. In this conversation, we're going to explore some of the ways in which society confronts genocide. David Marwell is an historian and the director of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, which in fact is where we are now. Doris Bergen is associate professor of history at the University of Notre Dame. Deborah Lipstadt is professor of Jewish and Holocaust studies at Emory University. All right, let's talk a little bit about the history of prosecuting the perpetrators of the Nazi war crimes. Why was it and is it important to do so, and has the process been successful?
There are a number of reasons why it's important. Obviously, justice requires it. You know, the Allies won a great victory by defeating the Nazis, but they realized that that victory would be incomplete if the crimes of the Nazis weren't fully documented.
It is important to have these kinds of trials, too, because I think it counters that notion of collective guilt. In fact, what a trial does is sort out major war criminals, the Nazis, if you want to put it in those terms, from the Germans, who may also have been involved, who may have collaborated. And I think a trial is very important to counter that notion that we're all being tarred with the same brush.
I think it's important, but I think at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that this wouldn't have happened if the German populace hadn't gone along with it, whether it was a bureaucrat sitting in an office someplace in Germany figuring out a train schedule, or some bureaucrat sitting in an SS office in Berlin figuring how much of the gas that was used to kill the Jews in the gas chambers needed to be shipped to Auschwitz so that there would be enough stockpiled so that the gas chambers could function directly. This person never killed anyone, sat with a pen and a pencil.
And there you have one of the challenges in defining a program for prosecuting war criminals. You have to have a series of laws that were violated, and this was the major challenge for the Allies. What do we put them on trial for? What do we find them guilty of?
Okay, so let's talk about the Nuremberg trials and how they succeeded and how they failed.
The Nuremberg trials, in a sense, had to fail in the ultimate goal of bringing justice in a system where, as Deborah pointed out, the chain of complicity was so long and tangled and complex. But nevertheless, in terms of setting the historical precedent and also setting a legal precedent, the Nuremberg trials were tremendously important.
David, how did Mengele succeed in evading justice?
Mengele left Auschwitz in January of 1945, and he made his way westward and joined up with a Wehrmacht, not an SS, but a Wehrmacht hospital unit. He lacked one important identifier that really saved him. He did not have the tattoo under his arm, which all SS men were supposed to have. And if you had an SS tattoo, you were put to one side so that you could be examined more carefully. And if you didn't, you were assumed not to have been in the SS. We were first charged in the investigation of Mengele with trying to figure out what happened to him after the war. Once the body was found, the shift in focus of the investigation was dramatic. And this began one of the most complex and longest forensic investigations, I think, in history. And that task was finally brought to a conclusion when DNA technology could be used to identify the remains.
Of the Nazi war criminals who were not brought to trial, most of them live a good life after that?
The popular imagination was that Mengele lived in some jungle retreat with cigarette boats out on the river and dogs and jackbooted guards. And the reality was that, and there's some small justice in this, that Mengele's final days, where looking over his shoulder, living in a kind of squalid part of Sao Paulo, Brazil, in a small apartment upstairs, getting medical treatment from doctors that I think you and I would rather not have visited. That being said, there are clearly examples of people involved in Nazi crimes who had successful, comfortable, rewarding lives in every way that we would imagine those words to apply.
Talk to me about your book, Denying the Holocaust, The Growing Assault on Truth and Memory.
I once had a television producer call me and say, will you be on a show with deniers? And I said, no, I won't debate them. It's like asking a geologist or scientist to debate someone who says the earth is flat. I'll talk about them, but I won't debate them.
This is a problem for journalism. Does balance include giving the other side equal time?
Big danger is not that everyone will believe this, but that someday on the library shelves you'll have a section that says, here's the literature on the Holocaust and here's the other theory.
Let's talk about it. You wrote your book, and then...
I wrote my book, and in my book I spent a few pages at most mentioning a man named David Irving and citing him as the world's leading Holocaust denier. He sued me for libel in England, where the laws favor him. I had to prove the truth. He didn't have to prove I lied. We were 4 years in preparation for the trial. The trial itself was 12 weeks long. I won the trial. We won slam dunk. And then he appealed 3 times and lost on every appeal. But it took 6 years and a great effort to reach that point.
What do you think was accomplished by defeating this lawsuit?
This man, was defeated. Now he is known whenever something is written about him, the moniker that goes with it is the man who was declared a Holocaust denier, an anti-Semite, and a racist by the High Court. That was what was accomplished. Does it mean denial will go away? Does it mean anti-Semitism will go away? No.
You have devoted much of your life to wrestling with this subject. What motivates you?
It's so fundamentally important for my students to understand, precisely for many of the reasons that we've talked about today, to understand that a genocide is carried out by real people in the real world in real time, to understand the burden of trying to create, even in small ways, justice in a world post-genocidal and sometimes a world during genocides. I teach at a Catholic university. My students got very upset and said, how is it possible that the Pope, the Vatican, the churches didn't do more to rescue Jews? It was during the genocide in Rwanda. Rwanda, one of the most Catholic countries in the world, in fact, certainly in Africa. I said to my students, think about the world that we live in. What will someone say? You know, maybe they had an excuse then if we couldn't believe it, we didn't know. What excuse do we have? So that connection is very alive in the classroom.
As a teacher, I've spent time teaching. I try not to be an advocate or an ideologue. I try to be an educator. But in the back of my mind, it's not just Auschwitz or Birkenau, it's Cambodia, it's Rwanda, it's the Sudan. They're the tragedies of this generation's lifetime. And for them to understand that at least when we talk about the Holocaust, it was beyond belief. It beggared the imagination. Today we have no excuse. We know what's going on. What are we going to tell? What are they going to tell the next generation? We were too busy. We didn't care.
I want to thank you all for joining us, for sharing both your thoughts and your knowledge with us. Good night. I'm Linda Ellerby.
For an in-depth look at the evolution of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the factors that shaped its development, visit Auschwitz, Inside the Nazi State on pbs.org. Next time on Auschwitz, Inside the Nazi State. In 1944, the frenzy of cruelty and killing is stepped up. Auschwitz becomes the most horrific human extermination center of all time. Why don't the Allies, learning of the mass murders, take action to stop them? And as the Nazi defeat is imminent, see the dramatic last days at Auschwitz and what these war criminals do to escape justice. To order the DVD or companion book of Auschwitz, Inside the Nazi State, call 1-888-607-2999. Auschwitz, Inside the Nazi State is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Peter and Helen Bing, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Wasserman Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
We are PBS.
The wolf ran ahead and disappeared into the forest. Little Red Riding Hood was so busy.
In news from the woods, there were confirmed reports. The wolf sprinted directly to grandmother's house.
A solid oak entry door with steel hardware and a deadbolt lock could have kept the wolf out of her house.
But the wolf got in, and there he found Grandma resting on an antique wrought iron bed worth between $6,000 and $8,000.
Did somebody say wolf? Wolfgang Amadeus?
In my interview with the wolf, he said he prefers to do his own stunts to convey more realism to the story.
Hey, if my dog Pal were there, the wolf wouldn't have gotten near Grandma's house. I am the wolf with big white teeth. Hello, little girl. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
There's more than one side to a story, and you deserve to hear them all.
From American experience, an enemy at the doorstep.
We didn't know how soon the Japanese would attack.
A race to protect the homeland. It was extremely vulnerable. A battle against nature.
It was 30, 40 below zero.
Follow the long, hard road to secure the continent during World War II.
There were people who said this can't be done.
Building the Alaska Highway on American Experience.
Next time on Nova, a detective story that rocked the scientific world for more than 40 years.
This is certainly one of the best radiocarbon dates that's ever been obtained.
A Viking map whose composition is a mystery. Could this prove that Columbus wasn't the first to discover America?
If it's a fake, it was done by a master.
Nova, the Viking deception. Next time on Nature. One morning, nearly 30 years ago, hunters killed an orangutan mother and kidnapped her baby. But this was not the end of the story.
He escaped.
Against all odds, this orphan named Kusasi has dominated for a decade, beckoning the curious from around the world.
He's got me. He's so unbelievably strong.
It's a story of survival, a story of Kusasi's rise.
You're watching viewer-supported Vermont Public Television, where you belong.
Hi, I'm Leanne Lee. At Vermont Public Television, learning never ends. And with that in mind, we are planning another tour, and you're invited. Departing on May 7th will be
Polish political prisoners and others the Nazis thought a threat to their rule were imprisoned. Crucial to the operation of Birkenau were 4 crematoria with gas chambers attached, where those selected to die were murdered and burned.
To